Now, on this morning's program with Neil Mitchell, Mr. Neil asked the former Assistant Treasurer Josh Frydenberg if he knew what a transition to retirement pension was. Here was Josh's reply.
Explain it to me. The transition to retirement scheme, how is that taxed?
What do you mean the transition to retirement? If you're talking about super more generally?
No, transition to retirement.
I'll have to have a look at that particular policy.
All right, well, he's the former Assistant Treasurer. In the studio with me right now is the current Assistant Treasurer of the government, Kelly O'Dwyer. Kelly, good evening.
Good evening, Tom. It's nice to be with you again and your listeners.
Would you like to have a crack at explaining briefly what a transition to retirement pension is?
Yes, well, a transition to retirement pension is something that someone between the ages of 55 and 65 can enter into if they are looking to scale down their work but draw down on their pension.
Okay, now the income that comes out of a super fund for that transition to retirement has hitherto been tax-free. I believe as a result of the budget changes last week, it's now going to be taxed at 15%. The budget paper suggests that the government will reap $2.9 billion over 4 years for doing this. Why do you want to tax a transition to retirement pension?
So it's important to note for your listeners here that the transition to retirement changes don't start straight away. They start from the 1st of July 2017. So
they
are
will start
prospective changes, and it will be a 15% tax. Now that is a concessional tax arrangement. So for somebody who is on a much higher income, paying much higher marginal tax rates ordinarily, they will be still receiving a very strong benefit because they will be concessionally taxed.
But if you're someone who actually is just doing a bit of part-time work and maybe not paying much tax at all, you could actually be worse off under this arrangement.
Well, the Productivity Commission actually had a look at this. In 2015, they had a look and they said a lot of people who are using the transition to retirement pension phase arrangements are people who are not scaling back their work. They're people on the highest income levels. They are still working full-time and they are using it to get very generous tax concessions. Now, we believe if you are transitioning to retirement, you should get generous tax concessions, but just not as generous as what has previously been allowed for.
Can I ask you just some broader issues with fiddling with super? Now, today I've spoken with our finance commentator, Scott Hayward. He's a financial advisor. I've spoken to a lot of other people in the industry. And in the last week, they have turned, in my view, from being, by and large, supporters of your government to being bitterly opposed. And the reason is this. They say that whenever you fiddle with the super rules, whatever the reason is, whether it's to make something fairer or less concessional or to close off a perceived loophole, you get people upset and people become disillusioned with the superannuation system. Now, for example, I've had callers today and people in the industry saying, stuff super, I'm just going to get the biggest family house I can and I'll put all my wealth into paying that off. And then when I'm retired, I'll just go on the pension because that's what all this rule changing is pushing me towards. Do you acknowledge that fiddling with the super rules is often a bad idea?
Look, I understand that people get very frustrated when there are ad hoc changes to the superannuation system, which is one of the reasons why the government accepted the recommendations made by David Murray in the Financial System Inquiry when he said you need to have a clearly legislated objective for superannuation. Because, Tom, your listeners would be pretty surprised to learn that we don't have one at the moment. Now, when you legislate an objective, it makes it much more difficult for governments to change superannuation arrangements that don't match against the objective. And the objective that has been set is to provide income in retirement that supplements or substitutes for the age pension. But I think the most important point for your listeners to understand is that 96% of people are either unaffected by or advantaged by the changes that the government is making to superannuation.
And I get that, I do. But I think the issue is in Australia, and this is a good thing, a lot of people are very aspirational. They might only have a relatively small super balance now, but they say, look, one day I want to keep working hard, I want to build up my savings.
And we want them to.
But the problem is when they look at the ground shifting underneath them, they say, well, why should I bother? Because who knows? Super might be changed again and my money will be trapped in there. Maybe I should do something different.
But Tom, that's exactly the point. We understand Australians are aspirational,
Yeah.
and we want them to be, and we support them in that, and we want people to save for their retirement. And we're actually making it easier, for instance, for people who have interrupted work patterns, women who might have been caring for children or elderly parents, for instance, can now make catch-up contributions for their unused concessional cap on a rolling 5-year basis if they have low super balances. That's a good thing. We've also made it easier for people who are part on a wage and who might also have a small business as well. It used to be very difficult with the rules that were in place for them to contribute to their super. We've scrapped them to make it easy, to make it just as easy for them.
Before we go to some calls, we'll take those, 96900 693. There's another issue that's got people upset, and that's the apparent retrospectivity of some of the changes. In particular, so people can contribute to super as part of, garnishing 9.5% of their wage, and that goes into their super fund. But you have been allowed to put in extra money on top of that, money on which you pay the full rate of tax.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, it used to be that you could put in, I think the limit was $180,000
Per
a
year.
Per year. Now what you said is it can be no more than 500 grand in total. Now, what happens to people who, over the last 7 or 8 years, might have put in 180 grand a year? And I know we're talking about quite wealthy people here, but they've followed the rules.
Yep.
They've got more than 500 grand. Are they now going to be penalised?
No.
No?
And this is the critical point. This is absolutely the critical point. So we have announced a $500,000 lifetime cap for non-concessional contributions, which is after-tax contributions. But for those people who have followed the current rules to date, who have contributed, let's say for argument's sake, $2 million in non-concessional contributions to their superannuation, they themselves can keep that in superannuation. They are not forced to take it out.
No, but will
they
be taxed extra?
And they
on
don't. And sorry. And the point to make here is that what we're saying is that they can't, from budget night, put an extra $500,000 into their superannuation for their lifetime
there'll be no
cap.
retrospective tax penalty for having that extra money already in your super
No,
fund?
we're not going back and saying to those people you have to pay additional taxes as a result of that. Absolutely not. It is grandfathered.
Right now we've got the Federal Assistant Treasurer, Kelly O'Dwyer, in the studio. Peter, good evening.
Good afternoon, Tom, Miss O'Dwyer.
Good afternoon, Peter.
I don't think you realise how filthy people are. Now, it affects everybody eventually, not now, but in 15 years. Now, I'm dumping about $2,000 a month in our super. I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to spend it, and I'm going to get a pension, because what's the pension pay? $800 a fortnight for a couple?
About that.
To earn that in interest, you're going to have maybe $1 million in the bank. So if I just keep that in cash, I get the pension. I can do what I like with my money. It's mine, and you don't get your grubby mitts on it.
But Peter, can I say this to you? I mean, you can transfer $1.6 million into your retirement income account, and all of the earnings on that are tax-free. Now, that's 1.6 for you and 1.6 for your wife. So that's $3.2 million. So, I mean, if you've got so much more than that, that's great for you. But on the excess, you can still keep it in super, but it will be taxed at 15%.
But I think, Kelly, that Peter's issue, and this is the issue I tried to raise minutes ago, and maybe I didn't do it very well, is that people say, righto, you're saying under these rules, 1.6 million each over a lifetime, but the rules have just been changed, and so what have they changed again? And every government sort of says, oh, well, we won't fiddle with super, and then they do. So that's why I think people like Peter, might lose confidence in the system.
Well, Peter will be paying a much higher rate of tax on his earnings if he leaves it outside of the superannuation system, potentially.
Well, I think Peter wants to spend the money instead.
He's perfectly entitled to do that
No,
if that's
of course,
what he chooses to do,
but
and we don't prescribe it. I mean, this is the thing. Each individual, should be perfectly entitled to make decisions in their own best interests and
I agree.
and their retirement futures interests.
But people who make those decisions, just want to know that the rules, if they say, right, I'm going to put this much aside so I can build up this much of a balance. But if the rules change, what's to stop a future government saying, well, if you've got more than, I don't know, $1.2 million in your super funds, you're an enemy of the state and must be taxed to oblivion?
Well, no one is saying that though, Tom. I mean, it's not correct to say that at all. And some of the money we are getting from this is actually being reinvested, in effect, into the super system by allowing for the increased flexibility that I spoke about before, by ensuring that people who are on low incomes get the low income tax super offset, so they're not paying more tax above what they would otherwise be paying in their marginal tax on their superannuation. I mean, we are also allowing more flexibility for people to contribute to their super right up until they're 75. It used to be you could only contribute up until the age of 65. This is actually good news for people. It gives them more choice and flexibility, and for those people who have done particularly well, we applaud them. It's very good for them, but we say that there is a certain ceiling amount of 1.6 that you can transfer in, and the earnings are tax-free. Now, we only ever tax in the accumulation phase, which is the any excess of 1.6, the earnings. We don't tax the capital, we don't tax the withdrawals. So those people can still withdraw quite a lot of money and spend it if they see fit to do that.
Let's hear from Alistair. Alistair, go ahead.
Geez, I've got to tell you, Miss O'Dwyer, you are really good at political spin. If you go back in history with superannuation, Tom, under the Labor Party many, many years ago, you may recall they had this concept called reasonable benefit limits.
Yes.
And anybody transgressing those limits were severely penalised. When the Howard Costello government were in office, they introduced some policies which basically precluded anybody from getting any Centrelink benefit between the ages of 55 and 65. You had to live on your super, and that decimated retirement savings. Now we have this nonsense. I've got clients, Miss O'Dwyer. I'm an advisor, also an accountant, and basically I've got clients who are running self-managed superannuation funds whose asset is largely physical property.
Yeah, and that is an issue, Alice. I'm sorry, we are going to run out of time, but that is another issue.
Well, look, I'm happy to come back, and I'm happy to talk to your listeners and talk through these issues at any time that suits you and suits your listeners.
Well, that's great, because I think it's something that needs to be explained, and we have learned today that $500,000 change, in fact, is not retrospective when they're filling out there what it was. So I appreciate that. Very quickly, the campaign. Now, I happen to know that the Greens are targeting your seat of Higgins. Are you worried about that?
Well, I think everyone in the election campaign, targets members, and I'm no different. There'll be people who'll run in my seat. Look, I just get on with doing the job that I'm elected to do, which is to represent my electorate and to represent their interests in the nation's parliament, and I do that each and every day.
What about the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull? I don't believe he's visited Victoria yet. Are we going to see him sometime soon?
Well, there's a very long period of time to have this campaign. Too long, I'm sure many people think. We'd like to see
Malcolm. We'd like to see him.
He will most certainly be here in Victoria. I can absolutely guarantee that.
Does he like it here in Melbourne?
He absolutely loves it here in Melbourne. Yeah, he does. He really loves Melbourne.
He likes to go on the tram and fiddle with Twitter.
He loves the trams. He thinks that this is a beautiful city. I know that Lucy, who of course is a big authority on cities right around the world,
Mrs. Turnbull, absolutely loves Melbourne as well. Good to hear. Kelly O'Dwyer, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be with you.
Kelly O'Dwyer, the Federal Assistant Treasurer there, and she's promised to come back. It's 6 to 6.